赵小兰部长与他的父亲赵喜成博士现在仍然致力在教育以及公益方面持续的耕耘，也希望可以借由自己的故事来激励更多的人。接下来来看我们的独家专访。我们知道说，赵博士，我们晓得您的前半生可以说是充满着漂泊与冒险。您从嘉定乡下来到了上海大城市，又漂洋过海到了台湾。在您担任船长的时候，您游历各地，到美国，最后是落地生根。您有如此了不起的成就，又养育了6位这样杰出的女儿，您的家族真的可以堪称是华人之光。而您在近期出版的新书《破浪者哲学：船王赵锡成与夫人朱木兰的人生智慧》，通过这本书，您希望带给华人社群什么样的一个启发呢？
与世界是精神，希望我的人生故事可以拓展引诱，给大家带去启发和鼓励，能够告诉大家，我能够做到的，大家都可以完成。
是。
第一个，特别是年轻人，勇于拼搏，改变命运。谢谢。
好，非常好哦。然后接下来就要请教我们的部长啊 ，Madam Secretary。You are the first Asian American woman ever to serve in presidential cabinet, including the positions of Secretary of Labor and Secretary of Transportation. Not to mention, you were the longest-serving secretary since World War II. And you are indeed the pride of Taiwan and a role model for all women. Before the age of 8, you lived in Taiwan, and later you moved to the U.S. with your family. Could you please share with us your experience about how you adapt to the American culture while keeping your Asian roots?
大家好，第一，不敢当，谢谢有这个机会，可以让我陪我的父亲。This new book about my parents' philosophy, Riding the Waves, shipping magnate Dr. James S.C. Chow and Mrs. Ruth Mulan Chu Chow's philosophy of life and their legacy, and then 2 previous biographies about my parents, Mi Fong Wu Wei, and the second one is Dan Ding Zi Zai, tell the story about my parents' inspiring life journey. At third, my father became the youngest sea captain at the age of 29. But he was often at sea for many months every year. So my parents decided to seek a better life for our family. He took a national examination, Yakao, and scored #1 and had the opportunity to go abroad to study. My mother was 7 months pregnant with their 3rd child when he left. And it took him 3 years before he could bring us to America. And obviously, when we first came to America, life was very difficult. My father worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. But despite these difficulties, my parents are always hopeful, optimistic about the future. And they encouraged their daughters to maintain our Chinese heritage, and that we should be confident of our Chinese heritage in America.
Very good, very good, very inspiring 啊，太棒了。博士，我现在要再请教您，我真的是认真拜读了您的新书。我觉得您的人生当中最宝贵的，就是您的夫人。她为您孕育出了6位如此优秀出众的女儿，您甚至在哈佛大学捐款4000万的美金，打造赵朱木兰中心，特别就是以夫人的名字来命名，为来自世界各地的优秀学子与业界的精英提供了在哈佛大学交流访学的最佳场所，真的非常了不起。根据历史来看，像您这么有成就的男性，很少是如此专情的。请问您最怀念太太哪一点？可否也请赵博士对太太说一段话？
我想，这是一种学问，也是主的特别恩典。我们2个人，太太跟我的贵境 完全不同。可是我们的信念一致，我一见到他就特别憧憬，爱上了他。好几位亲戚朋友求我要有自知之明，切勿妄想。在我的意志也决定强烈追求，也很幸运，主的恩典，我们终于成为救主，共同度过了人生的一步。我非常感激太太和我创伤共度60年，对我来说，一生只够一个人，因此我很幸运能够有太太白头偕老，这也让我此生无厌了。
真的好感人 ，so touching 啊。And now my question turned to Secretary. Secretary, your father, Dr. James Shaw, has always emphasized the value of education. And your parents have successfully educated 6 outstanding daughters. And what have you learned from your parents, please?
You know, filial piety is not a very familiar term to most Westerners. And yet, every Asian instinctively understands this concept. My parents sacrificed so much to enable their daughters to have a better life. Our first home in America was a small 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York. My parents always emphasized being a good person and contributing to society. We were also encouraged to maintain the long-term point of view, maintain moderation in life, and we were always taught to constantly try to improve ourselves every day, not to compete with other people, but to compete with ourselves. So they've always said, be generous.
Be generous.
Help others. And we were always taught that we had to earn our own living. Now, my father gave his assets to charity, not to the children. So to this day, my sisters and I all work very hard at our jobs to support ourselves.
太棒了，了不起了不起啊！真是太了不起了。那赵博士，我请教您，您的前半生我看到书中可以感觉得出是充满着漂泊跟冒险。您经过闯荡跟打拼，您现在可以说是功成名就，但是过去吃的苦也从来没有少过。您到底是如何可以度过这么困难的情况呢？
功成名就，实在不敢当，谢谢你的夸奖。不过我的人生比较非常从容，往主案不进，不过也确实充满了戏剧性。当年我初到美国的时候，举目无亲，经济拮据，只能够在曼哈顿上面的西区住到半间的客厅。我期待在美国的生活，可惜因为结症的关系，我没有将成绩单带到美国，因此尽管我在哥伦比亚交了学费，努力学习，但我当时并不知道从评审是不能拿到毕业学费的。后来我在争取学校看我成绩很优良的文章，责任考虑，但也遗憾以失败为终。更雪上加霜的是，在这种艰难混沌的时期，我就得到父亲因业做事的不好，我昏倒了家庭，心情会告诉自己，我的妻子，我3个年幼的小孩子还要依靠我，他们为我治了精神的能力， 我相信，我就在失败、不畏困难、见识不懈，才能成为成功的人，领会人生的真谛。
是的，是的，非常了不起啊！然后再来要请教我们的赵部长 ，Madam Secretary, you have met unprecedented achievement by being the first Asian American female secretary in the U.S. cabinet. Have you ever encountered any challenges because of your race and gender, and how did you overcome the difficulties?
当然有啊。Of course, there were challenges and discrimination. But I was never discouraged by it. I was so excited and so interested in what I was doing that I just forged ahead. But I did vow to myself that if I were in the position to do so, I would always help others. And having said this, I do want to mention the problem of discrimination against Asian Americans in the admissions policies of American colleges and universities. And now it's trickling down to high schools. Many people who think there are too many Chinese Americans in their schools. These Chinese American students deserve to be admitted because they studied hard, had outstanding records. And America should be a country where people succeeded on merit and not politics.
Great. 好的，博士，您跟夫人非常重视教育，不止培养出了6位学霸，女儿们更是多才多艺，而且人品杰出，气质出众。是否可以跟我们分享一下您跟夫人对于子女教育的想法跟做法呢？
我那是完美的现代人，因此女儿们的教育，我不惜全部归功于木兰的一味教养。我们让女儿们都能够发挥高数的素长，也让他们自己的兴趣，在他们自己内心的动力驱使下去做自己喜欢且全然的事。我那都相信，他们现在自己的人生才是最重要的。
是的，那么 Secretary Chow, you have attributed your success to your parents on various occasions. What kind of impact do your parents have on you?
Well, I think looking back, my parents spent a great deal of time on their family. Every night after dinner, after the children helped to clear the table, my parents would talk to their children, telling us stories about growing up in Asia, of what their parents faced in their lifetime, and what life was like in Asia. And on the weekends, when my father would do repair work around the house, he would always have the daughters be his assistant, carrying the toolkit, hand him the tools, and as he worked, he would talk to us about his life, about Chinese philosophical thinking, about culture. And as we grew older, my parents' words would help guide us in our daily lives. So to the parents who are viewing this, I want to say parents' teachings are the best gifts that they can give to children to help them navigate an often confusing world.
Very good. 好，再请教赵博士，您说过教育可以改变人生，这是您所秉持的信念。您的家庭也是因为教育而受惠。您自己的生活非常的节省，但是对于教育的捐献却是无比的慷慨。可否请您来为我们分享，在哈佛大学捐款了4000万美金打造赵朱木兰中心，您的初衷是什么呢？
木兰跟我不仅在哈佛大学设立了奖学金，还为很多其他的大学设立了同样的奖学金。由于我们谁都教育来之不易，因此我们想帮助优秀的年轻人得到教学的机会，以此来回归社会。我们有哈佛的语文实在很深， 没来我有4个女儿，其中有哈佛双学位，我非常感谢学校，所以很乐意为学校提供支持。哈佛大学对这块一向深很严密，所以当哈佛大学来接触我们，并向我们提出就款多样的时候，我们也感觉到非常荣幸。同时，我们也希望这次能够提升亚裔美国人的地位，表明我们亚裔也可以在这个国家就任地位，做出体会的贡献。
Secretary, you left Taiwan when you were 8 years old, and after going to America, you have returned periodically as your position allowed. I understand that you and your family met with Taiwan's presidents during your last visit in October 2016 with your father before you returned to the government as U.S. Secretary of Transportation. What do you remember about Taiwan?
我还记得我的小学，在新小学
Wow.
，and how impressive it is。我是8岁的时候离开台湾的，8年以后，我回台湾跟那个美加青年团。
Wow.
And after my White House fellowship, 白宫学者 I visited as an Eisenhower Fellow. And after down as the U.S. Secretary of Labor, 劳工部长, my father and I visited to lecture at Taiwan 大学 and received honorary degrees from 交通大学. My father has continued to make contributions, and he is building a new building in my mother's name in National Taiwan Ocean University in Keelung. Keelung was my father's home port, and Taipei is where my parents courted and got married.
Yeah. So now comes my question. What are your plans for the next step? Which title do you enjoy the most, and how would you like to be described in history books?
Well, I think history will record me as being the first Asian American female to be appointed to the American president's cabinet. But the titles that mean the most to me are being a good daughter, being a good wife, being a good aunt, friend, mentor. I've been a pioneer, a trailblazer, and believe that I've helped to lift up the status and open more doors of opportunity for Asian Americans and Asians in America and around the world. I'm very busy now being director of many important companies. But what is helping my father with his philanthropic activities and mentoring Asian American young people. It's my way of continuing to give back to society. So it's my way to continue to give back to society.
太棒了，太棒了！今天非常感谢赵小兰部长，还有父亲赵喜成博士接受我们的专访，让我们这亲眼见证到真的是华人之光，也非常希望能够尽快在台北看到2位的出现。非常谢谢你们的时间，谢谢。